Coach Jim Johnson, hi, and thank you for joining me on season 2 of the Question Guy podcast. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. And there are lots of things that I just want to ask you, but you just told me that you have a podcast of your own. And so really my first question is, what's new?
Yeah, so what's new? Well, as we are hopefully coming out of the pandemic, there were some changes that we all made, and some of them made them faster than others. And I was one that did not move very fast. I didn't think the pandemic would certainly last as long as it did. But one of the things that I did, ironically, to lead into podcast is I've always been an exercise person. In fact, I play a lot of tennis, but my wife does a daily walk, and I've never done that. Well, in the pandemic, when I'm like, I got to get outside, so I started a daily walk that I've actually been doing pretty much, rarely ever miss a day. And it's not a long walk; it's anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes.
Okay.
But what I've done is I've become a podcast addict. I never listened to podcasts until the pandemic, and then my son had bought these AirPods for me that I hadn't been using. And I guess that was a real positive, is that I used them and I've gotten introduced to podcasts. And then I'm looking to possibly do another book with a college professor on helping young and emerging leaders. And that's kind of been I've been out of coaching now for 6 years. And one of the things I started to think a lot about is how can I give back and help young and emerging leaders because my first basketball position, I was a head coach at 25 and fired after one season. So,
Oh,
uh, so that was a very humbling experience, but it was a real wake up call for me, and it really helped me uh, understand that I had a lot to learn about being a leader and how to
right.
build teams. And so, go answering directly to your question. So, about a year ago, with the college professor that we've been working some on this book, and a young man that actually went to the high school that I taught and coached, but I did not know him. I actually met him on the tennis court. We developed a friendship. We played tennis, and he had just graduated from Syracuse in a communications degree for his master's. And so he had done some podcasting. So I brainstormed with the three of us, and we developed this podcast called the Limitless Leadership Lounge that we started. It was just the three of us talking about different leadership ideas. And then we've made it more in recent times into the three of us interviewing someone. And we've had a lot of fun with it. It's been a really neat thing to do, and I really enjoy doing it. And and I've been on quite a few podcasts over the years, and as a guest. But it's really neat to be on the other side of the microphone. You being the question guy and really learning how to ask questions and be a better listener, and things that I did better the second half of my career. That's probably why I had a lot more success, because I became a much better listener and asked a lot more questions instead of trying to be the know-it-all.
But you're the coach. But you're now a leadership coach, at least according to your LinkedIn profile.
Right.
So that's your baby. So
Yeah.
there has to be a whole lot of uh, learn knowing what questions to ask to get people to think, because
Mhm.
typically if they're going to hire you, they're stuck. They're
Right.
stuck in a situation, and by golly, they can't figure out how to get out of it. And
Right.
so how does that work? How does that coaching situation for leaders work?
But each leader has different challenges. I mean, there are some basic principles of leadership that I believe in. In fact, I do a leadership presentation where I talk about 7 keys to be an effective leader. So I think there are some real foundations to be an effective leader. But I think in coaching and helping other leaders, I think the important thing is to really get some clarity of where they are, what are their pain points. And that's going back to your famous the question guy. That's why I think when you start working with someone or working with a team, you got to get to know as much about the situation, what's going well, what's not going very well, and then working with them to help devise a plan of attack, and some of the changes that they may need to make as a leader, or with their team, and those types of things. So it is a process. But I think it really starts with you as the coach being curious and coming in and asking questions and really sincerely wanting to learn as much as about what their situation is. So then you can evaluate and assess and then share some ideas to get them hopefully back on the right track.
Well, now I'm curious because I've talked with some coaches over the past 12 months, and everybody has their own unique style and everything like that, and that's okay. And everybody has their own niche market. But a lot of times they say, or I just ask them, when you get stuck and you don't know what to do, it's really a frustrating situation to be in. And I'm talking from the client's perspective.
Right.
So if somebody's knocking on your door and say, "Hey, Coach Johnson, I need help, but I really don't even know what the problem is. I just know that things aren't going the way I think they should." How do you clear away the fog? Now I'm just really curious.
Yeah. Uh, Good question.
Because
So,
it's frustrating. I mean,
yeah,
because and I've been
absolutely.
there, and,
Right.
you probably were there too when you said you got
Absolutely.
fired from one season. I mean,
Right. Absolutely.
well, what did I do wrong?
So I still think what the basic in helping people with leadership ideas is something I really take pride in, is getting clarity of what their story is, and then you can share stories to help them with their clarity on some of your experiences, because I think the power of story can really illustrate. Like, one of the things that I'm going to jump off for a little bit, but one of the things when we were building teams, I would often share stories to get them to think bigger and to get them to think of what we could do. But also, then I would always give them a caveat that I can see this happening for our team, but there are going to be some real commitments and sacrifices to do that. And then you share that. But when you build them up by sharing a story that they can buy into, then you can really get them to buy into what the work and the time and effort it's going to take, and also the sacrifice. I coached basketball, which to me is a very important team sport. And although individuals do get accolades, if you want to have a successful team, you got to get them to buy into their roles, and play more to their strengths. And those are all things as a leader that you're trying to do. So those are the things that I would also talk to a client about, is that, trying to share some stories to give them some illustrations, but also getting their story so I can get a little more clarity so I can help them best. And there's always unique situations, but, because I've been in the business as a leader for a long time, there's a lot of things I have seen, and in most cases, I can help them out with it. So.
Well, let's talk story then. What's been so if a client were to tell so a client's just going to pour out their heart, I would imagine, because
Yeah.
they're frustrated, they're probably even angry, things aren't getting done, and so they're just going to tell you things aren't working. So how do you turn that around using story? So that now, because truthfully, there's got to be power. Well, you said there's power in that. So
Mhm.
where is that power?
So, again, I would start with some basic questions. So tell me more of what's not working, to try to delve them in and try to get them to share their story first.
So you need some
And
clarity.
yeah, exactly. So getting
Okay.
clarity and getting them to share their story, what they're all about, I think is really important. And then secondly, once you start to establish clarity of, oh, okay, this seems to be your issues. And then I think one thing, Stephen Covey said this so well in one of his habits: seek first to understand before being understood. Is that I think before you can delve in and try to give them some help to their problems, is you got to make sure that they understand that you understand them.
Mhm.
And then once you break that barrier down, then you can start to give some illustrations of some stories that you put yourself, that you had experience in, to share how we solved your particular issue. Okay. But I think one of the things that I know I wasn't very good early on is that I immediately, you told me I'm struggling. I want to immediately come in and solve your issue, but I don't really have any clarity of what your real issue is, other than you're having some kind of difficulty.
Right.
So I think it's really important when you're working with people that you got to delve deeper with questions, something that you're famous for now. And then getting to the point to really what is the core, the real major issues. Because sometimes what they'll share initially really isn't the issue that you need to solve. And that's one of the things as a good coach does, is they delve deeper to get to that. And then, getting them, as I said, to share their story. And then you can use stories that you've been involved in to enhance the process.
So that begs the next question is, when you're talking with people who are in leadership positions, if they can't get something done, I mean, I'm going to make some assumptions. That's probably embarrassing for them because
Mhm.
they're expected to make decisions. They're expected to make good decisions and use the correct data to make those decisions.
Mhm.
And then when they can't do it, they may even feel like a failure. And I'm just kind of using words that seem applicable because we're all human.
Right.
Um, so what I'm kind of alluding to is emotions get involved. It's not just an intellectual thing,
Right.
and emotions get involved. And how do you weed as a coach, as a leadership coach, how do you weed through the crappy emotions to kind of really,
Emotions is part of the human experience. So there's
yeah,
no
but
question.
but you gotta, so when we're bad, when we feel bad, we
Yeah.
tend to criticize ourselves, and that makes things worse. We tend to feel worse then afterwards.
Right.
So how do you weed through that, as somebody who can who can see the bigger picture and see the potential, and as long as you've got clarity, it can kind of bring them out of that fog. So
Right. So deep question. I like it. So I think the important thing is again, and using empathetic listening, where the fact that you're first going to really understand what their complete issue is to the best of your ability. And then, through stories, you can give illustrations to try to put yourself someone in shoes. You're never going to be exactly the same, but then use a story to illustrate how you were able to overcome challenges. And the other thing is again, with getting into their shoes, some is that I think one of the things sometimes we make a mistake is, oh, you think your problem is bad, you should hear this problem. Is your
well, that's
I,
probably not a good way to coach.
no, that's not good at all. But really saying that, boy, you have some really, have some empathy that your challenge is something that we're going to take some time to delve through, and then but then give them some things that that this is one of the things of this challenge. I'm not sure it's exactly the same as yours, but these are some of the strategies we used to help overcome that. And that's where I think that when you start to get into giving them some strategies of how they can do it. And then, as a coach, you got to monitor that, as a feedback loop is, when they go out and try some things, going back to simple questions, what worked, what didn't work, and what do we need to change?
So what I'm hearing a lot on LinkedIn from, because there's coaches for everything, and so there's
Yeah.
leadership
Right.
coaches, there's
Yeah.
career coaches, there's even coaches for speaking, for because that's
Yeah.
something I kind of want to get into. I want to
Yeah.
be a speaker at one, a stage
Right.
speaker.
Yeah.
I think that'd be really cool. But
Yeah.
there's coaches to do just that, and so I've connected with some of them.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
but what is being communicated by these coaches is stories help build trust.
Hmm.
Is that something that you see when you're working with your clients? Does sharing story or telling story build that trust with your client?
I think it certainly can help. And, I'll say, I'll delve in this a little bit deeper because it's one of my 7 keys, and something I challenge in my presentations is that one of the things I think effective leaders do is really have clarity of how they're going to build trust with the people they're leading.
Okay.
And one of the things that, because I'll often ask people when I'm presenting to an audience is, how many people think trust is important in building an effective team? And it's 100%, it's like everybody, yes. But then I kind of give them the challenging question that kind of befuddles them at first. And it's like, well, how many of you, when you took over as a leader of your team or organization, had a plan to how you're going to build trust? And they kind of look at me like, whoa.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so what I do is there are three prongs, and because as I mentioned, my first varsity basketball position, I got fired after 1 year. I
Well, I
did
want
so,
to talk about that before
yeah.
we're done. I want to know what happened.
So I'll tell you more when you want to delve into that. But then I took over three other programs, and built a staff in a program where we turned the programs around all three times very successfully. One in a very short term where we got a winning record in the second season. Then I got an opportunity to move on. And then I took over two other programs that had been losing. And I spent 7 years at one and 20 at another.
Wow.
And so that, but what my three key principles we talk about in building trust is, number one is you have to be consistent in aligning your words and actions. So if I said something as the leader, like we're going to practice tomorrow at 6:30 a.m. and I walk in at 6:35 a.m. Oof, that's going to be a little bit of a hindrance of the trust, because I think trust takes time to build. Most people agree with me, but it can be destroyed with one really bad decision. But it also can be chinks that can be taken out when you make little bad decisions. Like if I come in 5 minutes late, that's probably not going to absolutely destroy our trust account, but it's going to hurt it.
Right.
Okay. And if I become chronic where I'm late all the time, I've sent a really poor message. So
Right.
aligning your words and actions are so important from there. Number two is we come in, and I talk to our staff about this and with our players, is we wanted to build everything on telling each other the truth. As the Bible says, the truth sets you free. So, sometimes that was where we actually would make an example out of somebody. We didn't do it a lot, but sometimes it was necessary when someone messed up. And also we also did a lot one-on-one meetings. This is what I'm seeing. This is where we need to see you correct. But really sharing the truth with each other. We would really come down hard on our players if they lied to us. That was not acceptable, because we felt we couldn't build trust with that. And then the third thing, because I took over four programs that all been losing. The first one was a disaster. The next three were successful. And the what I learned is that when you take over situations where there's been a lot of negativity, when my situation was losing games, they were losing games, they had poor records, is that it could be a business where you're getting close to going bankrupt. The same kind of situation. Is the important thing is I think you really got to focus in on catching people doing the right thing, and not only doing that, but also praising them with specific praise. And then the other thing we always talked about is how can we really show our players, in our case, our young people, that we care about them. And I'll give you one quick illustration. It's simple, but I think it's something it did separate me from most of the coaches that I coached against. Is every single kid in our basketball program, we had 5 teams. We had two middle school teams and 3 high school teams. Every single kid in our program received a personalized birthday card from me. Okay, so that showed that I cared about them. That I knew when their birthday was, and I send it, or if it was someone on the varsity team that I was coaching, I would bring it into practice. We share a little bit about it. I would give them a personalized card. And so those are the things. And then going to the specific part is I was teach our coaches that don't just say nice job, Johnny. I mean, everybody likes to hear nice job. But after a while, it's like, okay, what did I do that made a nice job? So what I would always share with them is the illustration. Instead of saying nice job, Johnny, I say, Johnny, that was awesome how you dove on the floor for a loose ball. That's what players on championship teams. So again, I'm building that story. We're thinking about it a little bit in the future, but their actions, those types of the actions, we need to reinforce with positive and specific.
Well, that can't be said any better than that. I think that is right on target. And you should know because you're the coach. And I just say that because I was a mental health professional years and years ago. And so we always say that. Be clear on what, when we talk to parents about to their kids, be very clear and specific about what they're doing that you like and kind of reinforce that behavior. And so I think the same, because it's all human behavior.
Right.
And we need to hear it. And when we're not doing the right thing, like you said, you need to have some one-on-ones and say, this is order for you to stay on the team, this is where I need you to be and what I need to see you doing. So
Let
um,
me add one last thing, Keith, if you don't mind.
sure, go ahead.
And the other thing, with our situation, where I was coaching, I was a high school coach. So, I had, players that were anywhere from 14 to 18 years old. And but they had parents or guardians.
Mhm.
And, you needed to get buy-in. So one of the things that I learned is a lot of coaches did this, but um, I don't think they had enough clarity in their parents players meeting. So one of the things I learned, and we did for probably our last 2 decades, that I thought was very powerful, is when we had our parents and players meeting, we would sit in separate tables. So it would be the varsity parents. For me, it was the three high school teams. We had a JV team and a freshman team.
Mhm.
All the players from each of those teams sat together. The parents all sat together, and then the coaching staff. And what we would do is one of the exercises we did towards the end of the meeting, it was really powerful, is we asked each group to share the three most important expectations of the other two groups. And
Wow.
then we had someone from each of those groups share that. So as we're going through the season, I kept all those, and on record. Okay, this is what you expected. Like sometimes the parents would say, we expect that you'll bring our, in my case, I coach boys, our sons will be done at the time you say they're going to be done. So I was pretty cognizant. Now I can't say I was perfect, but that I knew that was one of their expectations for that particular season because they shared that. Okay.
Mhm.
So I think that's another great way when everybody has clarity of what the expectations of each other are, and you do that consistently. That's a great way to build trust.
Wow. Now I'm speechless. That was excellent. And I think that's perfect because it really demonstrates you're being human and you setting expectations not only for yourself, for your whoever you're supporting you in your coaching environment, but the parents and the young athletes that you're really in charge of.
Mhm.
They're going to look up to you and not just remember that one day, that one week, that one season, but if you really impact them in a positive manner, they're going to remember you when they're an adult and they say, I've really learned how to do XYZ because of Coach Johnson. And I think that's really, really important. Um, so you've talked about, story and building trust and really enabling people to kind of see what they need to do because we've got clarity. Is there any other thing that you do as a coach of leaders that you want to share with our audience that's really impactful?
Well, I'll share another thing we used to do that, again, because leaders are usually leading people, right? So they usually have some type of team. And I'll share a little bit about what we would do in our early team meeting. After we chose our team, we would bring all the players and our coaches over to my house. And we had a lunch, and, so we had a little fun together. And then what we did is three things that were really important. We talked about what the program's mission. In our case, our mission was to develop winners on and off the court. And I would reinforce. In fact, I like this as a leader. I heard this from Patrick Lencioni, and I love this, and I've used it now. Is a leader, I believe, is the CRO, and that means Chief Reminding Officer. You got to consistently live the mission, share the mission, and making sure that everybody's buying into the mission. Okay, so that was our team mission. Secondly, is that we talked about what were our team goals. So as a leader, I think it's really important that we're on the same team for our same page for our team goals. Okay. And we would, the old adage, I taught them a lot about goal setting. When you think it, ink it. So we would have our goals written down, and everybody got a copy of that. We had it up on our bulletin board and that kind of thing. So there was clarity there. But I think the important thing we got to remember as leaders is you need to get input from your team to get buy-in. Okay. That they had some real say on what our team goals are. Then the next piece is we gave them individual goals because they are individuals. And I met with every player individually, and we talked about, they would share what their goals are. And I had to really, as the leader, make sure that we're in sync of what I felt their role was, and maybe what their role maybe was different. And so we had to have clarity on that. And, what are some of their goals, and how can I best support them but also understanding, I would always say that I always want to hear from you. But my decisions are going to be based a lot on what is best for the team. And that's something, again, as the leader, you're consistently sharing that. I'm going to try to do what's best for the team, but I do want your input. And then, as a leader, a lot of leaders have a leadership team. In my case, it was my captains. So I had a Monday morning, or not Monday morning, but Monday after school captains meeting. And something you'll appreciate being the question guy is when I first started those captains meetings, I would just come on with the agenda, and I would go boom, boom, boom. And you know what changed, Keith, and was so immensely helpful was when I came in and just started asking questions. And I would write notes, and I would ask questions like, how is our team chemistry right now? And just stop and let them share. Number two is, how can we best coach you this week? Number
Gosh,
three,
these are great questions.
yeah. Number three, is there any changes you would recommend to help us be better this week?
Oh,
Any recommendations? Another one we would personalize would say, is there anyone on the team that really struggling that we're, as coaches unaware that you can help us, let us know so we can best support that person. And, just so it'd be 4 or 5 questions like that. And I would simply ask them and listen.
yeah.
And boy, it just changed because they really felt they had feedback. And you know what I did? I didn't do it all the time, but another little minor suggestion is once in a while, we usually would have 3 captains, sometimes 2, sometimes 4. Is sometimes I would just invite one player that wasn't a captain in, just so they would get a taste of what it is like to be a captain's meeting and hear from them. So I think that's another thing you can do. I wouldn't recommend you do it all the time, but just bring in someone that's not considered on your leadership team, just so they get a flavor. Because I think one of these huge important is to be a great leader. I think one of your major goals is to develop leaders on your team and helping them become leaders of their lives and how they can help lead others as well.
Well, I'm speechless. That was beautiful. And I love those questions.
Thank you.
Coach Johnson, thank you so much for having a conversation with me. And it was a pleasure. And hopefully we can do it again. Maybe
Yeah,
season 3 of the Question Guy podcast. Thank you so much. And I'll see you next time.
my pleasure.